Hi, it's Lerald, and we're about a month into Season 3 of the War Within, so we thought this seemed like a perfect time to stop and really look at how tanks have been handling themselves so far this season, especially in this current era of a tank shortage. There's always a tank shortage, right? This is just the latest version of it. I'll just briefly mention the handful of tank changes so far in the season. Blood DK got about a 6% damage increase and a small armor buff about a week ago, and Druid got a hotfix to their broken 4-piece tier set a week before that. Otherwise, it's all been pretty quiet on the Blizzard front when it comes to tank changes. So have they nailed it? How good is tank balance right now? Let's take a look at some player data and see how things are going. But first, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and join our Discord as well. We're over 1,300 members recently and still growing, so come join our community. Alright, so there are a couple of really good aggregation metrics that we can use to kind of take a look at the number of classes, the number of people who are playing a given tank in Mythic Plus and in raids, and really the two best versions of that are Raider IO's Mythic timed run leaderboards. You can find that on the site, timed run leaderboards. Sort by tanks and then sort by Mythic Plus levels. If we do 12 and up, we could see a pretty clear breakdown of like 3 halves and 3 have-nots of the 6 tank classes, and then the other one would be Archon. It kind of does a similar thing where it aggregates a lot of the run data, and then it allows you to kind of sort by like average Mythic Plus score of high rated players, popularity, number of parses, DPS, which can be nice for figuring out why one spec that does a lot of damage, is like really popular, and another one is not, kind of helps with figuring out some of that stuff. So, obviously the first thing to kind of just think about whenever you're looking at popularity of classes is like, ultimately is that like an important thing, right? The fact that Prot Warrior is 5 times more popular than Blood DK, does that mean that it's 5 times better? Not necessarily, but it'll probably be 5 times easier to get into groups as a Prot Warrior than a Blood DK, maybe even more than that. And ultimately it really seems like there's a very similar overlap in these 3 tanks that are very popular, and also in these 3 tanks that are not particularly popular in Mythic Plus. And while I'm not going to say it's all on this, I think a lot of it boils down to the having an AoE interrupt for these 3 classes, and not having an AoE interrupt for Druid and Monk, and then not having a attainable AoE interrupt for Blood DK, because Blood DK, technically speaking, does have an AoE silence. If we look at the 3 classes that are very popular, you got Sigil of Silence for Demon Hunter, super simple, right? And then everybody takes Chains of Anger, so it's a 4-second AoE silence on a 90-second cooldown. Pretty good. Prot Warrior, same kind of boat. You play Prot Warrior, it's very easy to come down here and take Disrupting Shout. Now you got a 6-second AoE silence on a 90-second cooldown. Great. Prot Paladin, same type of deal. You build right down through the middle. I'll just Christmas tree some points here and, go ahead and take Divine Toll, 1 minute cooldown, 5-second, or 5 target AoE interrupt, and then of course you also want to take Divine Resonance so you get even more interrupts, right? Like, obviously this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but not really. These 3 classes have all really easy to use AoE silence, and then the rest of the classes either don't have one or have one that's really hard to get, and Blood DK here is kind of the other example that I'm building my way toward here. The issue with Blood DK is that a standard Blood DK setup is going to kind of build through the middle of the tree like this, all the way on the way down to the bottom, picking a bunch of these valuable nodes along the way, things like Purgatory, things like Iron Heart, and Bloodshot, Tombstone, Shattering Bone, Bone Storm, a lot of valuable stuff on the way to the bottom of the tree. The issue for Blood DK is that getting Gorfine's Grasp and Tightening Grasp requires a lot of point investment, and if you were to just drop like Bone Shield, that's 10% haste, you're losing a lot of armor out of Reinforced Bones. There's a lot of really good other talent options around the sides of the tree that are just too good to give up, and that means that they effectively don't have an AoE silence. This obviously isn't the only issue on display here. Prot Warrior is impossibly tanky. Vengeance Demon Hunter and Protection Paladin, maybe to a lesser extent, are reasonably tanky. They're not flimsy, they're not made out of paper like Brewmaster Monk has been in the past. Brewmaster Monk's a little bit tankier than it has been in the past. Bear Druid is reasonably tanky and does okay damage, but we can look at Archon and see, the damage output for Bear Druid, kind of on the low side. Vengeance Demon Hunter's flagging a little bit in popularity, and their damage is kind of flagging a little bit. It makes sense, right? It did seem like for a while through the first few weeks of this season, it wasn't really clear which of these three tanks was going to wind up being the top dog: Prot Warrior, Prot Paladin, or Vengeance Demon Hunter. But a hierarchy is starting to emerge here, and it kind of overlaps pretty nicely with Protection Warrior's increased value, utility value, and having that AoE silence in the form of Disrupting Shout. And then also their rise in damage relative to other tanks, and also their incredible tankiness. It's very easy to stay alive on a Prot Warrior, as you can see from the leaderboards here. It's like all the top level tanks, it's pretty much just Prot Warriors and Prot Pallies all the way down. There's probably also a little bit of exhaustion from Vengeance being so good for a long time. A lot of people are probably getting a little bored of it and would rather just put their eggs in another basket. Ultimately, you really can't go wrong with any of these three tanks. They're all super fun. They're all reasonably tanky, except for Prot Warrior, which is unreasonably tanky. But Prot Warrior does a lot more damage than everybody else, and there you go. And we can kind of see that reflected in the popularity numbers. Prot Warrior over 25%, Prot Pally over 25%, Vengeance Demon Hunter slightly under 20%, and Brewmaster Monk surprisingly over 10%. That's probably the highest they've been in like the last 4 or 5 years, right? Could be worse. All right, now I want to just briefly give a bit of acknowledgement to raid popularity, raid numbers as well. We can switch over to Archon's raid numbers here and just kind of take a look at popularity. Damage numbers are pretty much what we would expect, although Vengeance is a little bit better at dealing single target damage right now than it is AoE damage in Mythic Plus, so it's at least remaining somewhat competitive in that arena. But yeah, Prot Warrior and Brewmaster Monk has really been kind of the order of the day in raid. They're both very tanky. DPS Warrior and DPS Monk weren't really that great in this tier, and tanks often just provide the debuff or buff, and that worked really well throughout Prague. And we could kind of see this reflected as well if we take a look at some of the world first or top world kills of Dimensius on Mythic. You see Brewmaster and Prot Warrior being about 40% usage rate and everything else being pretty low by comparison. Even if you go back a couple of bosses to like Fractilis, get a much wider net, it's still very Brewmaster and Prot Warrior focused. Even if we go all the way back to like Soulbinder, that's when maybe things get a little bit more opened up. But ultimately, yeah, from about halfway through the raid on, it's Brewmaster and Prot Warrior, and that's reflected by their great damage. They're obviously filling a debuff need that other classes weren't, at least prior to some buffs to Fury Warrior more recently, and ultimately that's been the reason why they've been so popular, and it's been reflected in their performance in Mythic Plus, especially for Prot Warriors. They really are crushing it on all fronts right now. So having gone through those numbers, taking a look at what's popular, what's doing the most damage, and kind of considering some of our previous ranking of tanks in the run-up to the patch, this seems like a good time to just kind of go through and do like a fun re-ranking. And this is specifically like what is feeling the most fun right now to us, to play as, to play with, to have in your group, to have to heal. And we both agree, like, Prot Warrior is definitely top of the charts. It's tanky, it does great damage. The group utility is not bad. Like, Battle Shout isn't amazing, but AoE Silence is good, Shockwave's good. Spell Reflection feels fun whenever people let casts go through so you can actually kick them. That's always good. And then ultimately, Vengeance Demon Hunter and Prot Paladin are both like a cut below Prot Warrior in the current state of the game, but they're both in really good shape. Like they're both in the like A+ range, S-, whatever you want to say, but they're clearly like a small step down from Prot Warrior. And then really the rest of the tanks are all in decent shape. Like, it really depends on what you're trying to do with them. If you're just doing weekly 12s, weekly completion keys, 10s, 4s, whatever you want to do in Mythic Plus, they all work very well. And if you like Blood DK, you're probably in a pretty small minority, but if you like it, you'll like it, and that is certainly fine. It's great in raids still, very tanky. It just kind of has that limitation that all of the rest of these tanks that are down here, Brewmaster Monk, is a little bit weird. Bear Druid is very simple, kind of not a lot of depth to it, but it is fun, at least on just like a surface level. But the lack of an AoE interrupt, that lack of great damage output for Bear Druid and Blood DK is also kind of a weakness. Brewmaster Monk is a little bit more stable than it has been in the past, but it's still not amazing. There were a lot of people that were sure that Brewmaster Monk was going to absolutely crush it in the coming season in the run up to Season 3. That hasn't exactly worked out, but it's definitely exceeded the standard for Brewmaster Monk. You know, it's better than the worst case scenario, which is usually right where it is. So you kind of have to be positive for Brewmaster Monk right now. They're doing pretty good considering, and they're definitely like a fun off-meta choice that can really wreck the damage meters if you're wanting to go that way. Prot Warrior is really top of the charts right now. Vengeance Demon Hunter and Prot Paladin are both in pretty good shape. It really just boils down to whether you want to be a little bit more offensive, a little bit more self-focused, or whether you really like healing group members, throwing sacrifices and spell wording around, and yeah, you know, kind of playing a half tank, half healer hybrid. Prot Paladin's in really great shape if you want to do that. It's almost verging up into the range of Prot Warrior, but if you don't want to, then it's definitely like a step below the other two. And so that's tanks right now. They're really all in pretty good shape, but Prot Warrior is definitely a cut above the rest. The Midnight Alpha is probably coming in a month or so hopefully we get some more changes to tanks, some more stuff to shuffle things around in the Midnight waiting room. And yeah, Midnight's gonna be here before we know it. All right, that's it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and join the Skipping Sleep Studio Discord and become part of our community. And finally, thank you to all of our channel members. If you want to support us so we can keep making more WoW content, become a channel member or come boost our Discord. Thanks for watching. Bye.